Would you like a president who is cowardly but sober, or do you want one who is mentally challenged but is brave? It was a special Gazette notice, 1 page, shared on WhatsApp.
Yes.
So if you are not on WhatsApp that night,
That's it. Image refused to download. Please ask sender to refund.
even as president,
Yeah.
Kibaki never used to hold press conferences.
Yeah.
He would not address rallies every day. He would go for a month
Without speaking.
without
with
speaking.
media.
And then the day he calls you, everybody runs to State House and says, I want to tell you, I have only one
One
wife.
wife. Welcome to Politikali Konekted, a podcast on everything politics and governance in Kenya and Africa. We unpack the complexities of people, policy, and power. I'm your host, Diane Ng'ang'a,
aka Madam Speaker, and I am Chaka.
aka the Bishop. Today we have a really amazing guest with us. Someone who has been in the shadows of our discourse and our political discourse through media, and today you get to see his face. Our guest here is Mr. Mbugua Ng'ang'a, who's the editor-in-chief of the Nairobi Law Monthly and the Nairobi Business Monthly. He has worked in almost all major print media houses. You can imagine, he has also been part of the people who are developing the headlines that we see from day to day. That contributes to our political discourse. On top of that, Mbugua Ng'ang'a is also an accomplished author who has authored over 25 titles. Not one, not 10, 25. 25 titles. On top of that, he's a prolific ghostwriter and has also helped a number of political figures and business figures author their books. So without further ado, let us give a round of applause to our guest, Mr. Mbugua Ng'ang'a. Karibu sana Politikali.
Asante sana, thanks for having me.
Yeah, tungeendelea na hiyo CV. I think we would have needed another episode.
Yeah.
Because on top of that, pia wewe ni panelist. On top of that, pia wewe ni mwanashairi.
I wear many hats.
We wear many hats, clearly.
Yeah.
Multi-talented. And we are fortunate to have some of his titles here with us. There's a bit of a bias. Not all his titles are here. The ones we have here is political titles.
Correct.
I happen to be fortunate to have read some of your fiction. My children have some of the children's books you've authored. And now us as political animals get to enjoy Rigiji and the politics of betrayal.
It's a new
Mwai
book.
Kibaki, economist for Kenya. We can fix this country.
Yeah.
Very heavy political titles. Before we properly get into it, tell us, what is your earliest memory of being politically aware? When did your political consciousness start coming alive?
Okay, at that time I was not very much aware of whether I was aware politically or not. But when I was a young boy, I wanted to be the president of the US.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
And when I realized that you have to be a US citizen to become a US president, I used to think the way America has influence all over the world, countries should be given a certain number of votes
For their
so that they
election.
can decide who becomes president. And then when I started reading newspapers, I heard about a guy called Boutros Ghali. He was the UN Secretary General, and I used to admire him. And then I also used to admire a guy from Tanzania who was a Secretary General of the AU. That time, I forget his name, but he was a very handsome man from Zanzibar. If I remember his name, I'll tell you. And I used to say, these are jobs I can do. Yeah, but my first real political awareness came in 1992 when I was a young man. I had just registered to get my voter's card, and I was a member of the Ford Asili. Which was led by Matiba. Although we had been given free cards by KANU, so I am a member of KANU by virtue of having accepted to pick
the card.
The free card. It came with one stamp with a kajogo. It was written 10 bob. So the party paid the subscription for you for that year.
Oh, for 10 bob.
So it came with a sticker. It looks like a stamp. So we were very active in Nakuru. That time we were in Nakuru. And I remember meeting Jaramogi. He came to campaign in a place called Shabab. And they had come with Raila and other Kina George Nthenge and Kina Bamazriz and a host of other people. And it was a difficult time because the police used to come to the estates to beat up people after protests. So one day the police came to our house and I had problems with my legs, and my mother was washing my legs with dawa. And the police came in riot gear, wakajaa kwa nyumba. So when they saw ninaoshwa, they just walked away.
They walked away.
Yeah, but we were very active in politics. We used to go for all the rallies. We went all the way to Molo. That time there were clashes in Molo, and Matiba went to Molo. So people would give us lifts and would go there. That time there was a guy called Jenga Mungai. He was very influential, and he was Molo MP. And he had just left KANU to join Matiba in a Ford Asili. Initially, all of us were in Ford. Then Ford's split. Yeah, and then now, so those of us who are supporting Matiba, we went to Ford Asili. And the guys who were supporting Jaramogi, we went to Ford Kenya. Yeah, so in terms of political awareness, that was my first time.
So this is you in university?
Not yet. I had not joined university that time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You just turned 18.
It was nimechukua ID, nimechukua voters card. So now I'm asking myself, what can I do? Actually, I wanted to vie for councillor because we used to say, as long as you get the for the city nomination in Nakuru, even if you are what kind of person, you will win the councillorship. Yeah, so I had considered it, but my friends told me don't vie. So I didn't consider vying. I did consider vying for MCA, but after I talked to my friends, they told me you are too young. Give it a break. Let's see who we can support.
Yeah. So
those days, if you became councillor, it was easy to become mayor.
And mayor is now like what would be governor.
Yeah, but you are elected by the councillors.
Okay.
Yeah, not by the people.
Not by the people. Okay. So my question is, now you had this free card for KANU, 10 bob, that makes you a member. What made you choose Ford Asili?
So, everybody wanted change. Those days, it was very difficult to speak out against the administration. Yeah, and like me, I had interest in writing, and I used to hear my mother and her friends discussing Ngugi and other people who had been either jailed during the Kenyatta era or during the Moi era, and how people like Koigi comes from Bahati, which is not very far from Nakuru, how they used to be persecuted by the administration. And when I used to hear those stories, political prisoners, the mothers of political prisoners coming to Nairobi to protest, and they are removing clothes on the Uhuru Park. So we wanted change, basically. And then all these guys in opposition, they were very inspiring. Yeah. Like if Jaramogi came to our place, everything stopped, and you had to go and listen to him. The only reason I didn't vote for him, I found him very old. Because even when he was walking up the podium, there was someone on this side and there was someone on this side. So I said, this man is very old, even if he's a good person. For him? Apparently, we didn't vote for him. And then when a person like Matiba comes, the town comes to a standstill. Everybody wants to be where he is. Everybody offers their car to go to the rallies. So you could feel the energy. Yes. And then much later, I think Kibaki came. Yeah, so he comes towards the end, near the elections.
Yes.
Yeah, so even him, when he would come, people would congregate. Yeah, but people would say, oh, this person is mean. After the rallies, he would go to STEM Hotel in Nakuru, order his beer. He doesn't buy it for anyone else. So guys were saying, why is this way? Are we voting for this person? Even if you find him at STEM, he can't even buy you a soda.
So I'm very curious because actually
those are some of the narratives.
I was going to bring up that question. And, you've written about Mwai Kibaki for a younger generation, and of course, right now, people consider him, not that we've had many, but one of the greatest presidents this country has ever had. Now, at this point in time, this gentleman is a KANU stalwart. He's been vice president for a long time. He lost that position and got sort of a demotion.
He became health minister.
And then you have this charismatic Kenneth and Matiba, who many of us, millennials, Gen Z, didn't get to interact with, but we hear about from history.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, also, there's clearly a lot happening. We're just coming into multipartyism. There's for the silly, splitting away, branching away between Matiba and Kibaki. And there are so many stories around that, how Kibaki coming later is a spoiler. Between one of them, the other was calling the other General Kewoya. Kibaki had refused to leave KANU up until the last minute. So at this point in time, what is this electric feeling towards Matiba? How are people viewing Kibaki? And particularly for you, how did you differentiate between the two? And what do you think was going on in terms of even the KANU politics behind the scenes, Kibaki being called a spoiler and the like?
So that time I was not very conscious of all those nuances. But you're a young man, you're just getting to know politics, and you can hear debates, people debating, this paper is, this side is for Matiba, this one is for Jaramogi, this side is for Kibaki. And you could hear people are saying, this guy is sober, but he's a coward. So they would say, like now his supporters would ask us, would you like a president who is cowardly but sober, or do you want one who is mentally challenged but is brave? Matiba had come from detention, and he had been tortured, and he had to go to London for hospital, you remember. So, but those were very basic arguments at that time, but those were the arguments that people were having. And Matiba had promised water, and that is something that I have always remembered. Because he said, the first thing I'll do, the water from Victoria, we are going to pipe it to all homes. And I said this would be a game changer because I used to visit my grandmother in the village, and we had to go to the river to get water, or to take the cows and the goats to drink, or to wash clothes. Those days you wash the clothes and put them on the rocks to dry. So if this guy is saying, I can bring water to every home, I thought that would have been a great game changer. And I believed he would have done it. So for me, those were some of the considerations. And then, of course, there was the mood on the ground. Matiba was an electric figure. And then we also had the clashes, which now everybody said, now we have to stop these clashes. And Matiba spoke very strongly about clashes. And those days we had Bishop Dingi in Nakuru, who was a Catholic, Mananzeki was a Catholic bishop. And Dingi invited Matiba to the Catholic Church, which was hosting IDPs. So if you admired Dingi that time, and then you see Dingi is working with Matiba, you have to go there. Because you see now, Dingi was a big influence for us politically and religiously in Nakuru. Because I went to a Catholic secondary school, although I'm Anglican. So you can see the influence of the Catholic Church in persuading people which way to go.
Very interesting themes that you've brought out as you're telling us your story. Is one thing I'm hearing is that Kenneth Matiba spoke to your needs, or something
Correct.
that you saw that is different. So they spoke to you and you're like, we need water and this is a person to bring it to us. Another thing you brought out is the role of the church. You know, when you see a church figure working together with a political figure, then you automatically see it as this is the direction we're going.
Yeah.
It's an endorsement. Yeah. And now I want us to take us now post 1992. You're now politically aware. You voted for the first time. What happens between 92, or what? Maybe give us one or two significant things that happened for you politically between 92 to 97. Now, the next time you voted, did you still vote with Ford Asili? Where were you at that time?
That period I was in the university. Maybe what I can say are two significant things. I studied philosophy. So we did we used to call it political philosophy. And we were taught by a gentleman called Mbugua Ng'ang'a. He was a firebrand. And sometimes he would put down the syllabus and he would just talk about geopolitics. So we had Mobutu as president at that time. We had various presidents across Africa who had dictatorship tendencies, and he would talk about that. And he really energized our thinking about political philosophy. So I think that was very significant. I think Mbugua Ng'ang'a died like 3 or 4 years ago. He was a leader of WASU by the time of his death. I think he was Secretary General. So that was one. The other thing is I tried my hand in student politics. I went to Egerton. So we had the Egerton University Students Union, WASU, not WASU, Egerton, SWEU. Student Union of Egerton University. We were in the same camp with Mbarile. He became treasurer. Joe Ageo, who is now editor-in-chief at the Nation. Suba Churchill, and people like that. I was in that formation, and I wanted to vie for the position of Secretary General. But when my father heard about it, he called me home. He said, I sent you to university to study, not to engage in politics. So I had to drop my ambition for SWEU leadership, but I became the first representative and also my class rep.
Okay.
So, but that one was more like a prefect kind of thing. So you mediate between the student body and the faculty. I'm at the student body and the department. Yeah. So I stepped down, and Joe Ageo was nominated as Secretary General, and the whole team they won that year's election. So they went into office, but I was part of that team.
Wow.
So even after they won, we continued together because you see we were affiliated. It's only that I dropped out, and I didn't drop out because I wanted to, but because I had been persuaded to
drop out.
So I can say those are the two significant things. But you also remember that 1997 we also had clashes.
Yes.
And now people used to come to Egerton University to seek refuge. So for us also that was a terrible, terrible time, because now you can see all these atrocities, and from the campus you can see the houses burning, you can hear the people screaming. Some of the people who have been shot with arrows are coming to the sanatorium. So for us it was a very difficult time as students, seeing all these atrocities happening right next door to you, and there's nothing that you can do. Yeah. So for us that was also a big development, and it influenced how we voted, of course. Yeah, because now you see, now we blamed Kanu for the clashes.
Right.
Yeah, but now Matiba's influence had started waning.
Okay, in 97.
In 1997, I can't remember who I voted for. Maybe I'll tell you, but for sure, it was not Kanu. Yeah, because we thought this is part of the problem, and we need to move away from it. And there was a push that time at the national level for the opposition leaders to unite, because if you look at the votes for 1992, the difference between Moi and Matiba was 300,000. Kibaki had 500,000. So even if Matiba and Kibaki had worked together, they would have won. If Matiba and Jaramogi had worked together, they would have won. Yeah, and I think 97 is when Gilu was on the scene.
Yes.
And she really energized us. And the way I liked her party was called SDP. Why I liked her party was she was with Anyang' Nyong'o, she was with a guy called Njonjo, who was a very good intellectual, and now she was the presidential candidate, although she finished fourth. Yeah, so it was a very interesting time for us. Yeah.
And so one of the things that this is before the 2010 constitution.
Correct.
And you raised a very interesting point about, and it's something that's often come up in discourse. If some of these opposition figures had come together, then things would have shifted. And we actually see all those prior efforts lead up to the moment in 2002 when they do come together, having learned from past mistakes. However, alternative histories tend to be quite tricky, right? When you do the math, yes, numerically, it makes sense. But do you think at that time, from your observations of KANU, even if all three, Matiba, Jaramogi, Kibaki, had joined forces, do you think that the regime at that time would have allowed that to fly?
I believe they would have. Because if you look at the formations in parliament, the opposition was the majority. Moi had won with 30%.
Yes.
Which means that 70% of Kenyans had voted another way. But I think that is one of the things that influenced the decision to put in the constitution that a candidate must score 50% plus one vote. Otherwise, a guy can win with 25%
That's true.
and still become president. You just need to have 20 candidates vying.
I'm glad you've said that, which now brings me to a question. And I was going to ask a question about parallels, but first let me come to that issue of the low percentage. Yes, the threshold in the constitution right now is 50% plus one to win. However, there is the provision for a runoff if nobody attains that. Right. But the runoff is between the first two candidates. Is it a lacuna, a gap, or a loophole in the constitution that scenario of the pre-2010 constitution can repeat itself now in the runoff because somebody unpopular can arrange such that he gets to sail by either gathering all, let's say, independents and the like, and if he had gotten, let's say, 30% in the first round, you have a scenario where you have very many candidates, 30%, 20%, 15%, 40%. Now, that person who had gotten 30% in the first round, in the second round, just because they have that, maybe the first one got 30%, the other one got 29%, and the others got less than that. That person who got 30%, now in the runoff, gathers all the small ones behind them, and you still have a legitimacy issue.
You will not have a legitimacy because power comes from the people. So if you are number 2 in the main election, and then you galvanize support and you become number 1 in the runoff, you are still the popular candidate.
Yes.
You saw it happened in Liberia when George Weah was vying and he lost by a very small margin. And so they did a repeat election, and I think he lost the repeat election also by a very narrow margin. So our constitution is designed that the person who is first past the post in a runoff gets it. And you see it happened in 2017 when the Supreme Court ordered a repeat election. It's unfortunate that Raila did not contest, but it would have been nice to see how that one would have turned out, because it would have been a correctly 2-horse race. But now the moment he said, I'm not vying as long as Chebukati is still the chair of the IBC, it denied us an opportunity to see how that would have played off.
And just to advance that argument a little bit, technically, yes, that person is able to galvanize support. But of course, you can see, given that it's only a few months between that election and the runoff, if this person had such a small percentage initially, there is, beyond the numerical addition, a legitimacy problem. And I ask that to then ask, is there therefore potentially a problem with our system, given all the debates for presidential versus a parliamentary system?
So this is my view of that. There's a requirement that for any candidate to be declared president, you need to get at least 25% of the votes in at least half of the counties. Is it not in each? At least half of the counties.
Yes.
Yeah, which means that even in a runoff election, you will still expect that to hold. I would presume, because the law says for you to be declared president, number one, you win the national vote. Number two, at least half of the constituencies, you get 25%. So I don't think, in my personal view, that there would be a problem in that sense. Unless now you win and you have won 25% in 20 counties. Now there will be a problem there. Yeah. But if you have met that the two thresholds, perfect.
The voice of the people has spoken.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe let's now go. We've seen 97, there were clashes and there was political violence. And I mean, you are the Gen Zs of that time. So you are seeing this. Did that, I'm curious to know whether when you are seeing the state, the heavy hand of the state, did that make a few people or majority fear and say, you know what, we're not even going to vote in the next election? Or did it make now massive people now come out to vote in the next general election?
It energized people to vote. If you look at the percentages of voting that time, turnout used to be between 76 and 86%.
Wow.
Turnout.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So I look at a place like Nairobi in the last election, you had a 54% turnout. And I say, what is this? Nairobi used to get 76, 80. Some constituencies used to have up to 86. And we even had a time when people had 90% in some constituencies. So it really brought out people. And the number of people who turned out to vote was way, 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 way bigger in terms of percentage than in the last two elections, because the last election was about 63 or thereabout. It was actually less than 60. Some places it was 56.
This is now 97.
97. It used to be 86.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 86%.
Yeah.
It's huge. And people used to carry each other. Kama wewe ni mgonjwa, you are taken to the polling station. You are given a leeway to vote. Then you go back to your hospital bed. If you are a drunkard, they tell you you will drink after if you show us that your finger has ink. So it used to be you had to go. Yeah, even if you're in a hospital bed, they needed to see
the ink
on your finger. So if you don't have ink, even people can frog march you to the polling station.
I like that.
Yeah. So I remember, for instance, old women would be carried in those days. There were no motorbikes, so they would be brought in bicycles, mkokoteni, or people are carrying them physically. Then they come, they vote, they are taken back either home or to hospital.
Wow. I like that. And I feel like I'm seeing now how we got to the 2002 moment, because for both Chaka and I, we say that's when I could say politically, even though we were not eligible to vote, that the wave that carried the country between 2001 and 2002, even as small children, it was impossible not to want to know what exactly is going on. And we would engage with flyers of Kibaki versus Uhuru at that time. It's now I am seeing how we got to that moment.
Correct, yeah.
And now maybe I ask now, post 2002, where are you at in your career? You still had interest in politics, I'm guessing.
Not to vie, but to know
what's happening.
Yeah, but what I can tell you, for just to bridge that gap, when I came now to Nairobi to work, my first station was at an NGO where we were doing a magazine on democracy, human rights, things like those. And we were involved in the civil society movements. We used to work with the organizations like Forces. Forces was led by Kinawili Mutunga. Then we had another organization led by Kivutha Kibwana. Mother Karua was also in the scene. She was a big leader in the law movement. So we had all these stars in the civil society that we were working with, and that made things like Ufungamano initiative possible.
Yeah.
And because of the work that they did, actually that is when now the the foundation for changing the constitution
started
was laid. Because we used to meet up on Moi Avenue. There was an organization called RPP, Release Political Prisoners. So they used to host all civil society actors to come there and discuss what we would want to see changed in the constitution. We had people like Otto Nirongo, who had a movement called Basic Needs Are Basic Rights. And that movement is what gave birth to the Bill of Rights in the Constitution today. People like us, we used to campaign for things like Kenyatta Day to be renamed Mashujaa Day. So we used to go to Uhuru Park, we would put billboards of people like Kimathi. The police would come at night and remove the billboards. So we used to, at one time my colleagues were arrested and they spent 3 days in committee because of the work that they were doing. And me, I was just lucky because I had been kept in the office by my boss. Otherwise, I would have been.
You'd have been with them.
One of them, yeah. But after 3 days, the court said there's no case to answer. They were freed. So we also had people like Nakiraito Murungi. And then now, Kibaki started coming to those forums. So he won over the civil society. So because now he would show up from time to time. Like when we had a memorial for JM, he would show up. If we have a memorial for Nyerere, he would show up. You know, things like those. If we have the International Human Rights Week in May, he would show up. So he became ingrained with the people in the civil society. And actually when he won in 2002, he appointed some of them to his government. And he appointed them to various positions in government. Some were ministers and some were in the bureaucracy. So that was a big moment. And you remember after the election, one of the things that they did was to demolish the torture chambers at Nyayo House and make them public. And that was done by Kiraito. And it was a significant moment for us in the civil society because it meant now all these things that we were fighting for, now we had a chance to change them. So that is now when I also transitioned now from activism. And I now decided to become a proper journalist. But there are people who were left in activism, like Namaina Kiai, they continued with it. But you see, for them now, they had no plans of going to other sectors. So they remained in the civil society movement.
So, you know, we are in a very interesting time in our country, given that transition from activism to journalism, and now you find yourself in a place where you have titles like "We Can Fix This Country." We have titles like Rigathi Gachagua and the Politics of Betrayal. And of course, this arises from the context of you being, you know, a journalist par excellence. But these are heavily political titles. And I think over the weekend, we were all engaged in discussions about journalism versus activism. So how do you find that it comes full circle to this point, and how does your role now as a journalist and where you sit, seeing, especially as an editor-in-chief, seeing the lay of the land, you have different views coming across your desk, which you have to balance, and still having a view of your own. How does that reconcile?
The way I see it, I think the tipping point for me came about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, when I was enrolled in a course on leadership, which was jointly organized by Akan University and Harvard University. And we did a course for 9 months on transformational leadership. And that's now when my consciousness as a person who can offer thought leadership started. So when COVID came, and we were in between jobs. You remember now the disruption in the media happened just around that time. So I had the time now to go back to see the work I had done over the years, because I had been in journalism for more than maybe 20 years. I said, what can I do to bring all these ideas together? And then I was given a column at the People Daily, because now I had said to myself, if I don't focus on a national problem, I'm going to have problems of my own. So I said, to deflect attention from my problems, let me get a call. Actually, I was never paid for it, so that I could think big thoughts.
Yeah.
And you don't atrophy. So that's what I did in that intervening period, and this is a product of that reflection. And so I put together all the articles that had public interest in them. What is our view about education? What can we do about infrastructure development? How can we solve crimes, including gender-based violence? How
Taxation of small businesses.
things like those. How can we make our economy work? So those are some of the issues. You can look at the table of contents. You see the big topics that we were looking at. So I said, let me put these ideas together. And then we see whether we can get people to reflect about them.
It's very interesting because almost every topic here is very relevant today.
Correct.
Nairobi Expressway will boost e-commerce. The challenge of femicide, you've written about it.
It was a big issue until 2 months ago. There was a demonstration in my neighborhood because 4 women had been killed in 1 month. The church came out and told people, we can't live like this. You can imagine.
Treasury needs to reevaluate public spending.
Big problem.
Right?
Big problem.
And even I'm seeing here something else on Treasury is like why Treasury feels pressure to tax poor businesses. Like these are still problems of today.
Very topical.
Actually, at the beginning of the year, I wanted to post it on social media and say, this is my manifesto. Because even if you're a politician and you take this book and you just say, I'll implement, let's say, if it's public transport, why don't we have buses or commuter trains? And then we solve all these problems of traffic. And you can take 2 issues. The way I told you, Matiba had said, I'll deal with water. You take one issue and you deal with it. Kibaki came and said, I will deal with education. And he made a big difference. So if we can do, Uhuru came and said, we are going to fulfill Vision 2030 goals. And he did a lot of work in terms of those pillars.
And the big 4 pillars.
So if you say as a leader, even as a county leader or an MCA, that I'm going to focus on this, you will have a lasting impact.
And now that you've just mentioned manifesto, let me take us on another tangent kidogo. Now that you mentioned manifesto, I think more recently with the recent 2022 campaigns, with everyone, with all the candidates having their manifesto, and then leading to now where we're at 2 years later, there's been a discussion both online and offline that they don't need manifestos because even when they write their manifestos, it is not implemented. What are your thoughts on that?
So let me give you a story that will make you laugh. So when the parties were beginning their campaigns, they went around the country and said, we have collected views and these views are going to inform our manifesto. So I told my team, that time I was working at the People Daily, let us do a series. Every week we interrogate the manifesto of each of the contenders. And my team was telling me, but these things don't matter. These are just a document that you need to tick a box because the IBC will ask you, do you have a manifesto? But the moment you get into power, that manifesto is forgotten. But this is not a new problem. This problem started even in 2002. Because all the things that NAC had promised Kenyans within 3 months, signs of breakup were all over the place. So they even forgot the manifesto. They had said, for example, that they'd give us a constitution in 100 days. The first constitution came in 2005 and they could not even agree. So people were split between bananas and orange. And that's how, by the way, ODM was born. Because it arose from the orange movement. So the journalists were telling me, these documents are immaterial. And now when I look back, they were right. But me, I thought as a media house, we have an obligation to tell people, this is what your party stands for. So manifestos have become a checklist Uko na manifesto? Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have offices in every constituency? Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have 1,000 endorsements from every county? Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just a
But shouldn't we now, as the public, because we're looking at a Kenya post June 2024, where we saw the power of we the people. But should we now, the public, now use these manifestos as sort of like a scorecard or something to hold them accountable? If you told me, if let's say Matiba did win in 1992 and he said he'll bring piped water to Nakuru, and that is something that you would hold him accountable, that if you didn't do this, and say even Kibaki, who said that, we'll bring free primary education, and if we didn't see that, then we would have something, although he didn't achieve all his promises, Mwai Kibaki. But I'm thinking, could these manifestos be turned to scorecards?
This is what I think should happen. We do not have parties that are based on ideologies, and that is where the problems begin. So manifestos will not only matter if parties are based on ideologies.
Thank you.
Yeah, but our parties are based on personalities.
Yes.
So the moment you have a party based on the personality, the thinking of that personality becomes the manifesto of the party.
Yes.
And becomes the guiding principle of the administrations that they form.
And I'm glad you bring that up, which now takes me back to what we were discussing earlier about numericals, about numbers and the runoff and the like, and that legitimacy problem. Part of our problem is our political party culture, because parties are supposed to be about representation. And Madam Speaker and I have had several discussions about the problem of the cult of personality. And you find that if you have a system where you're voting for a party, and not even necessarily individuals in that party, if you have that short list of that nomination list, where based on the number of votes that proportional representation, number of people who voted for that party, then you get an allocation of seats. That issue of numericals and the cult of personality, which we've discussed several times. If you have a system where people are voting for a party as opposed to individuals, the proportional representation system, based on the number of people who vote for that party, then they get seats allocated in parliament, right? And that party now internally will have nominated people to a list, the way we do with nominated MPs, but now you do it for the whole system. That way, people are put in a position where they interrogate the party and what it stands for, as opposed to parties being briefcases that individuals use to ride to power. And I say this because you have a situation where if you have proportional representation, then based on the number of seats you have in parliament, you take the leadership of the country. And if you don't have sufficient numbers, then the parties that are forced to negotiate based on those ones that are closest in ideology and what they're going to then implement, as opposed to now this other system of voting for a candidate based on, the charisma, their speech, their eloquence, their popularity, their sympathy, what they use to garner votes, how they're able to raise tensions, and almost people like, leaning towards football teams or sports. And it's about keeping score. This weekend, this person said this. What's going to be their next move? And you see as well, even in what happened with this gentleman, 2 years after the country has put them in power, you now have a situation where numerically he's impeached, but we know there's another kind of number that influenced that majority that
Impeachment,
impeached him. So, and in the last episode with our last guest, we were dealing with that problem of borrowed legitimacy, where sometimes those technical thresholds of numbers are seen for convenience. In the same way, now even these manifestos are just technical issues that need to be addressed. Should we be coming to a place in our country where we're actually interrogating our political culture? In our constitution, we have political rights. It's only now recently that we have institutions that speak to our political party culture. So what's your thinking around that, and where we are going as a country vis-a-vis where we're coming from?
I think the scenario you are describing is what we saw in Germany last week. And I think we also saw it in South Africa during the recent elections. I think they were in November. But in Kenya, I think is a very complex problem that we face, because you see, if you say that the parties are going to choose the person who is going to lead the country, and then you have these members of parliament going to parliament and they are influenced by non-political considerations. Let's say there's money at play, for example, or there is intimidation, then it means that the will of the people or the will of the parties might not always prevail. But if you elect parties and this party will choose this person, and there is a guarantee that as long as the party's structures are used to bring in a new candidate to replace that person, the way ANC does, then you can have a guarantee. If that does not happen, people can wake up in the morning, they say, we are tired with our party leader, we want a removal. You see, like the way Rigathi Gachagua was removed from being deputy party leader. There was no NDC, for example, and yet the NDC is supposed to make that kind of decision. Yeah, when Raila was stepping down to go and vie for AUC, there was no NDC to come and say, let us now give Nyong'o. Raila just says, give this guy to hold until we make a decision. So our party structures, number one, we need to strengthen them, and we need to respect them. In the absence of that, that formula of saying that the party with the majority produces the president is going to fail, because we don't have internal party discipline. Number two, we have a system in which parties in Kenya have strongholds. And the people who own those parties or who lead those parties, they handpick or they have an informal system of deciding who gets the party nomination. Which means that even the will of the people is not always respected at the nomination stage. So if the will of the people is not respected at that point, or your choice of candidate is limited at that level, then you see everything else after that has a question mark. You understand? So for me, I would say let us strengthen the system that we have, because as I told you, we used to go to take old women to go and vote. And there were people who were asking at some point whether we should have universal suffrage. Because, and I found it very strange, because you cannot say that someone who is 80 can't vote on account of age. So what makes the person who is 18 think that they are more rational than the person who is 80 or 90? So, but the reason people are asking that question is because they saw old people being taken to the polling stations and the numbers were mattering. You understand? So you cannot just question a universal suffrage because it's not favoring you. Either you want it or you don't want it.
And that brings a question of political rights.
Exactly,
And I want to ask an interesting question on political party rights. Should Rigathi Gachagua be allowed to run for president in the upcoming elections? Political rights.
You see, he's a citizen, and our law says that as long as you have not exhausted the mechanisms for trial, you are eligible to vie. So even if you take his case up to the Supreme Court and he decides to go to the East African Court of Justice, he is still eligible to buy. So if he goes to East African Court of Justice and it makes a ruling, I believe there is an international court of justice.
For him.
So by the time you finish the process, there is nothing to stop him from being on the ballot. That is number one. Number two, as to whether he should be on the ballot or not is his decision.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah, so it's for him to decide. And then you see that one of the reasons I wrote this book is so that people can see the charges. I put all the charges there and how the Senate voted. So if you say this person took property from his brother before he was elected MP, but you still went ahead and nominated him to be your running mate, why didn't you do due diligence before? If you say he bought land and the source of the money that he used to buy that land 20 years ago is not clear, why didn't you do due diligence before nominating him? And for me, and I really need to say this, I hope it's not extra constitutional, we have a hand-picked deputy president. In the event that we need a transition, we will have two people who are not elected heading the executive.
The deputy president.
See, if there's a transition, the deputy president is handpicked.
Yes.
So he has to handpick
Another deputy.
You understand me? Because there's no provision for that. So you are at risk of having a scenario where you have an elected leaders in national office. So for me, it's a real danger. And it's one of the reasons I wrote this book. Because it means there is a serious problem we are going to face in the event something like that happens. And then number two, this is the first time a deputy president has been impeached. The closest we came to it, and there's a chapter on it, is when Dr. Josephat Karanja was facing a censure motion, not even an impeachment motion, a censure motion. And he opted to resign before that time. But you see, Dr. Karanja was not on the ballot. He had been appointed by the president. So the president had still the power to appoint another person. So that reason I wrote this book is that these documents are very hard to come by now. The impeachment was in October. If you go and look for the Mutuse ruling, Mutuse files, it's very hard for you to find the original. If you want to look at the High Court ruling on whether you can stop a constitutional process that is ongoing, it's very hard to find it. And you see now it has come back to bite the Supreme Court judges. Because the High Court said you cannot go to court to stop a constitutional process. Then the JSC receives 3 petitions against the Supreme Court judges. And then the judges are saying, let us stop this process. And people are saying, we have a ruling which was given in
oh my goodness.
which was given in October, that once a constitutional process has started, it has to go full circle. You can go and question it later. So the things we do, they can come back to bite us. And that is why I wrote this book. People might not understand it at the moment, but it's a real danger that we have exposed ourselves to. And we really need to think through it so that in future, when we have an opportunity to impeach someone, we know what that means. Indeed.
And that's something that we had an episode actually unpacking the impeachment. And there's something that I said is that the impeachment process of Rigathi, whether we were in support or not, has set a precedence.
Correct.
And we'll not know the effects of this precedence until we get to that moment later on in future. And now I'm hearing that you're sharing with us that some of these documents are really hard to come by. Why do you think that is?
I don't want to speculate. But you see, actually, part of the reason I was able to get them is because now I have sources in these institutions. So I can call the PA to the speaker and tell him, please give me this ruling. The speaker of the Senate made 2 rulings. It was not possible to get the second one, which was even more groundbreaking. The Speaker of the National Assembly also made a ruling. These documents are saved as images online.
Images?
Yeah, so you don't know what is the name of the image. So how are you going to get these documents? If you look at the memorandums from the State House to the Senate, it's very hard to find it now. but I have it here because it was a special gazette notice, 1 page shared on WhatsApp.
Yes.
So if you are not on WhatsApp that night,
That's it. Image refused to download. Please ask sender to resend.
yeah. So you see, so the reason I'm doing this is for posterity,
Yes.
and I believe,
Yeah.
I believe one day people will come looking for this book.
Yeah.
Because they will say, what did Mutuse say? What did the Senate say?
Yeah.
Who voted? Like
Yeah,
now
it
people
is.
didn't know that Sudi didn't vote for the impeachment. Yeah, and Sudi was one of the key movers. Why did he not vote? So if you want to interrogate that, and then you look at the number of people who voted in
Yes.
favor of the impeachment and the people who voted in favor of the appointment of Professor Kindiki, worlds apart. Everybody, not everybody, like 25% of MPs stayed away on the day they were supposed to endorse Kindiki. Why? So those are conversations that at some point we are going to
Yes,
to
actually,
have.
it's here. Number 100, Oscar Sudi was absent during the impeachment.
Yeah.
But things were moving so fast.
Babu was absent. But you see, this is a person who started the campaign and he
Yeah.
said, we are going to show this person
Yeah.
that we mean business. And then on the material day,
Hayuko.
I have a two-part question. In this book, you mention that, or rather you draw parallels between Mzee Kibaki and Rigathi Gachagua. A parallel I would not have imagined could be made. But I suppose you make it in the context of them being embattled DPs. So it's a two-part question. What parallels do you see between what Riggy is going through right now and what Moi Emilio went through as DP? And in that regard, what parallels do you see between Mzee Moi and
Our
our
current.
good man from Sugoi?
we discussed the issue of appointment. So Moi had the power to appoint vice presidents. The vice presidents were not on the ballot. So that was a big, big difference. I remember there were time we stayed for 14 months without a VP.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the day Saitoti was brought back, Moi said, even if I bring him back, is it going to increase the size of the sufuria in your house?
Yeah.
The amount of ugali in your house? And that is how he was appointed on. And they were in Limuru at a market. There was no even appointment letter, no gazette notice.
He just said,
nothing.
this is my...
He just went to Limuru. He found people in the market. He said, sasa nimerudisha hii moja. Hiyo itasaidia ugali iongezeke kwako. Now,
What?
you can check it. You can check it.
Hey.
Then, but the current DPs, okay, not the current, but ideally a DP is supposed to be on the ballot. That is
Yeah.
number one. Number two, Mwai Kibaki played a long game because he was, when I see his career, he was appointed assistant minister by Kenyatta when he actually ought to have been minister. So his first appointment was as assistant minister. All the other guys who were around him were made ministers, but he did not complain, he did not leave. Then, kidogo, he was made minister for commerce. And then after Moi came in, there was a lot of opposition for him not to become vice president. But Moi appointed him regardless. And he was in that position for more than 15 years, I believe. And towards the end, he was taken through a lot of humiliation. There was a guy called Elijah Mwangale who used to be sent to Nyeri, who was Minister for Agriculture, to go and fight him. He comes from Western Kenya, goes to Othaya to chokoza him. Before that, there was a lady called Jael Mbogo. Kibaki used to vie in Bahati. Then Kanu decides we are going to prop up Jael Mbogo to remove Kibaki from Bahati. Kibaki played a long game. He said, instead of fighting with this person, and she's not her own person, let me
Go to
exit. So he went to Othaya where there was zero competition, basically. Yeah, and he used to be elected and opposed most times, and even where he was opposed, the difference was so he would get 90%, 95%.
And became the longest serving MP in history.
Yeah. So, and you realize that among all the politicians who have been at that level, it's only Kibaki who was never jailed or arrested.
Oh, yes,
or tortured.
during that time, yes.
Yet he went for the funeral of Tom Mboya, who was shot dead during Kenyatta's time.
Yeah.
He went for the funeral of J.M. Karaoke. nowhere. Yeah,
Was
nowhere. Yeah, even when guys from Central Kenya were being jailed without trial, he signed some of those documents as VP. So he is a strategic guy that people really underestimated, and they didn't know this person very well. Ricky G, on the other hand, is a different kind of player. Yeah, he was a first-time MP.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then he's made DP. So his rise is
Very exponential.
yeah, and then his drop was same. Yeah. So and then him is a very vocal person.
The truthful man.
Even as president,
Yeah.
Kibaki never used to hold press conferences.
Yeah.
He would not address rallies every day. He would go for a month
Without speaking.
without
with
speaking.
media.
And then the day he calls you, everybody runs to State House and says, I want to tell you, I have only one
My
wife.
wife.
I want to make it very clear that I have only one dear wife, Lucy, who's here, and I do not have any other. And anybody who knows me and knows my family and knows how I live, they know I have only one wife.
But I keep telling people he didn't say that. He actually said, I have only one dear wife. And I
And
think
you all
the
know
qualification was important.
The dear.
No, that's my personal
You
view.
spend too much time around lawyers.
No, that's my interpretation of it.
Yes.
Yeah, so they are different characters. And their rise and fall, very different. Yeah.
And so, Moi and WSR.
They're very different people. We did not like Moi, okay? Because me, I was there. But we had differences with Moi. We didn't have differences with communities. And that's for me is a huge, huge, huge difference.
Interesting.
Yeah, because even people from Rift Valley would come and say, we are with you on this one. This is the person we are opposing. But now, people say, this community. If you can't say community, you say, Nyanza people. Umeelewa?
It's been
If you
made-
have problems with
balkanizing.
if you have a problem with Rigiji, sema Murima people. So and these people are not homogeneous. So I have a problem with putting communities together when you want to talk about a political figure. If you have a difference with your political leader, it's a very specific difference or disagreement or problem. So you cannot say you and your people. Umeelewa? Because you are the person we elected.
Yeah.
And that for us was a difference. It was a big, big difference when we were in activism. That we used to know this is the person we are opposing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but sometimes I look back and I think we were opposing because we didn't like him. Because there are some things that he was proposing which were not bad. But because he had already said, hatutaki,
Moi.
we could not
Yote yawezekana
we
bila
could not
Moi.
think rationally about some of the issues that he was saying.
Yeah.
But in terms of leadership, he was a solid guy. He was his problem was being too controlling. Yeah. So, but he put all the arms of government in a way that they could work in harmony. Yeah.
I have one question. We've looked at history, we've looked at comparisons between the past and the present. I have a question on prospects. History may not repeat itself, but it rhymes, and hence we see parallels. Given all the upheavals we have seen, do you see us hurtling to another government of national unity between WSR and Baba?
I think it will be inevitable. Because of the political shakeups that we have been witnessing, I think it will be inevitable. The only thing that might make that not happen is if Raila goes back to ODM and reclaims his position as the party leader. And then, and ODM is still part of Azimio.
Yes.
So which means he has to talk to Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, and then they can chart a way forward. But because Uhuru's people have already indicated this is our candidate, this is where we are going, it's very hard to have rapprochement between those two. So if Raila is going to be on the ballot in 2027, he will be in government maybe for a year or two, then he will walk out. And it's not new. He did that with Moi when KANU and LDP merged.
Yes.
Then 3 months to the election,
I walk out.
he left. He also did that with Kibaki. They were together in 2002, 2005. They fell off and he vied. So I would not be surprised. And then in 2017, 2018, he had a rapprochement with Uhuru, and he became, it was a very strange arrangement that you go to a state function and the deputy president is inviting a citizen to invite the president. I used to find it it didn't sit well with me. Yeah, because you see, the state has protocols.
Yes.
Yeah, the president can call you and donate his time because it is his time. But in terms of protocols, and you saw the same thing happened when Kimani Ichung'wah tried to introduce Raila, and then he told Raila to introduce the president.
Yes.
And the president told him, no. Rigathi has to speak first. Yeah.
Yeah,
you understand?
but he had also been a victim of that before, so he could see.
Who? Yes,
William.
of course. Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was a very strange arrangement that those two people had. So I'm hoping that if he's going to have a pact with the president now, it's going to be formalized, it's going to be structured so that we know in the system of things, he stands here. So that even in terms of protocol, remuneration, because you cannot do public work without being paid. Atakuwa job group gani, who is the appointing authority, what is the terms, Basically. And then if that is going to affect Mudavadi, because I believe Mudavadi is going to be affected, then now, and you see, Mudavadi has closed down his party. Basically, it has been swallowed by UDA. It's going to have a complication in the western side of Kenya, because now people start looking around for new party, new leader, and to ask, is Mudavadi with Raila or is Mudavadi with Ruto? So it's going to have an effect on the politics of western Kenya. My view.
Now, we are now just wrapping up the episode, and maybe one of my questions, because we mentioned that you're a author of many titles, and with all this knowledge and experience that you have in your field, you've also helped political figures write their books. So maybe you can mention to us 1 or 2 political figures that you have helped author their books in one way or the other.
So let me first start by saying I'm a storyteller.
Yes.
I love telling stories. That's number 1. Number 2, we don't tell stories about our heroes sufficiently.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have all this constellation of great guys. Sometimes they die without writing, and sometimes they write, but they don't write very well because they are not experts in that field. I bring my expertise to help them tell their stories. That is the contribution I make. So you have your story. You know how to tell it orally, because we are an oral society.
Yes.
But you want this record to be a permanent record, and I have the skills to do that. So that is where I come in. So the first person I worked with was a business leader. He was the KTDA chairman for 21 years. He used to be called Stephen Imanyara Mutai. Yeah, so he's the one who transitioned KTDA from being a public agency into a private entity, and he played a key role in that sector. Up to today, tea farmers get paid before police officers.
Wow!
Every month they get their money, and he transformed that sector. And there's no other sector in agriculture or whatever that is that efficient. So that was the first person I worked with. Then I worked with Isaac Hassan. Yeah, so Isaac Hassan was the chairman of the IBC before Chebukati. So for him, I helped him with the editing of the book. He had a ghostwriter, and I am the publisher of the book. And then recently I worked with Martha Karua. So I was the rewrite editor for her project. She had worked on her project for a long time. but it was not coming together the way she wanted it to. So I brought my expertise in that respect to bring all these narratives to make sense and for the thread to flow. So that was the contribution I made. So I'm writing a political book now. It should come out maybe hoping July, August.
Okay.
So it's about a political figure from the Rift Valley.
Okay.
So that one is that one is in the works.
I'm curious to ask who, but we'll wait for the surprise.
And then I was commissioned once to do a rewrite for a book on Dedan Kimathi.
Oh.
So when I did that book is when I was invited to do the book on Kibaki, because now the publisher told me, now you understand how I want these books to be written. Can you write this book? So I wrote the book on Kibaki. Then I wrote a book on Catherine Dereva. But that was a commissioned book, and I really love it because it's a beautiful story. And there's a time she wanted to take me to court, although I had talked to her, because she had authorized someone else to tell her story. And they wanted now to remove my book from the market. So, but we told her, number one, there is no libel in the book. Number two, you're a public figure. Number three, I approached you, we had a conversation. And she understands why we did not work together. So she stopped that issue of going to court. But when I was doing research on her book, I found about Tekla Rupe. And Tekla Rupe had far more significant achievements, even in terms of social contribution, her contribution to peace, her inspiration of the women from Pokot area, and a lot of other work that he had done. But unfortunately, she had sold the rights to her story to someone else. So she said, actually, she was very gracious. She said, my brother, I love your idea, but I've already sold the rights for my story. So I would be happy if public figures don't sell all the rights. So that some of us who are interested in telling these stories, we can be able to tell them. And biographies, if you want to understand history, there is a scholar who said there is no history, only biography, because history is made by men on the move. So if we can tell the stories of these people the way we have told the story of Rigiji, even in 10 years time, anyone who wants to know what happened to that man, because you go and read that book. It was done that time when things were still fresh, because 10 years from now these documents will be nowhere to be seen.
I really like what you're doing, because for us who were students under GHC, the record of how our political leaders then was very, let me just say, up here. There was no in-depth. And only when you go ahead and go and buy a Tomboya book and you buy a Jaramogi book is when you start to understand this character. Who are these people, You start to understand who are these people. Recently, Chaka and I last year went and attended the Too Early for Birds on Tomboya. And that's when you deeply now start to understand. So we feel like our current education system, the books, when it comes to political figures and public figures, it's really thin, and it's hard for you to really get your conscience to think like, oh, this is what this person does, or this is what they did, and this is how it affected the country. So it's a really important work you're doing, Mbugua. It's really amazing. And we are glad that our paths crossed somewhere. And now you're a contributor into this book club, Politikali Konekted book club that we want to start. And for our audience, keep it connected to Politikali Konekted for so much more. Make sure you subscribe, and see you again in a screen near you.
Thank
you.